Welcome to Truths, the podcast where love for Torah, Israel, the Jewish people, and God meets fearless critical inquiry. Through powerful conversations and thought-provoking solo teachings, we explore how timeless Jewish wisdom can ignite 21st century meaning, drive personal transformation, deepen our connection to God and to one another, and inspire bold action to heal our world. Here's your host, Rabbi Dr. Levi Brackman.
It's a real pleasure to have with me today as a guest Rabbi Avram Wilner, who currently lives in Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, and originally from New York, Brooklyn. I got to know him through Svarim he put out, and I have almost all of them here. Some of them he wrote, and a lot of them, though, he reprinted with footnotes and other very valuable additions. The work of Rabbi Aharon of Staroshelye, or as he's known in Lubavitch, Rabbi Aharon of Staroshelye, was the Talmud Muvak, one of the most important students of Admor HaZaken, or the Alter Rebbe as he's known, or the Balatanya, or the Rav, depending where you come from. And I never really got into this particular type of Chassidus. It's Chassidus Chabad. Up until recently, although my mashpia back in the day, Rabbi Aharon told me to learn him, but I never really took it seriously until recently. I found this new edition, and I wanted to figure out who put together such a wonderful edition. And I found that it was this gentleman, Avram Wilner, and I got speaking to him, and I thought that I need to have him on the podcast. So thank you so much for being here. And I thought when I originally reached out to you, I must be honest, I thought you must be a person in your 50s at least, because of the magnitude of the work that you put out here is really significant. And I was surprised to find that you are in your early 30s. It's really a very significant piece of work that you've done, or pieces of work that you've done here. So thank you for being here. And I want to first off ask you, what's your background and what motivated you to start really delving into the Chassidus of Rabbi Aharon?
So my background, I grew up in Brooklyn. I learned in more the literacy yeshivas, Yeshiva Brooklyn in Cheder, then Tar Tamimo, Fallsburg, the regular, then over here by David Salvechik in Eretz Yisrael. My family, they call Heimish. So right before my chasna, I got some sort of a service to start learning Tanya. The first Tanya I had was the black seasonal virus. That was like a real hakdom. That really brought, for me, I never learned the seifers. That really brought me into the Inyanim. And then from then on over the years, I just kept on going more and more into Chassidus. I went through some avodah, Ein Beis, but I didn't end up so much connecting to the Chabad Chassidus. More I connected to Yitzchak Meir Morgenstern, where by him Chabad it's part of a larger picture. Where by him his beginning is really Torah Kabbalah, and the avodah, the pnimis he takes from Chabad. So that gave me more of a direction that it's not really enough just to learn Torah Chabad. It has to be with the Kabbalah and with other civic chassidus. It's the background that I'm coming from.
So what was the hisbonenus that you said you had in the beginning to start learning Tanya?
My family really has a connection to Slonim. That's the chassidus. My father, my grandfather, great-grandfather. But I felt, coming from maybe the literature background, I felt I have to have more like a proper havana and a saga. What is chassidus? You know what I'm saying? What is it? What's the message they're trying to give? What's behind it? What's the moichin behind it? What's the avodah they're trying to give over? Most chassidim today, they have their instructions cleared out, but they're not really explaining what it's about and where you're supposed to get to with it. So, Mashen Chabad, that's the whole Sefer Tanya, the avodah of the Beinim, which is explained by Arichas in the beginning, and then you have the Shaykh of Emunah, which explains the whole, you call that scholar chassidus, weird. So, for someone that's trying to understand what it is, that's really the Sefer that you have to start from.
So your hisbonenus came about, you saying, because you had a Chassidish background, but because you had more of an intellectual bent, you wanted to not just become a groupie around the Rebbe who does things because the Rebbe tells him to, but you wanted to understand what the whole yesod of Chassidus is, what the foundation is. Correct? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, you could say like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so therefore you decided that Tanya was a place to start. And
so Alter Rebbe, I found that safe from some place, but the whole story. But that was the Sefer that opened it up for me. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about Rav Morgenstern and how that I know you were his neighbor. So was it just because you were his neighbor you were attracted to him, or you first found out about him and then you became his neighbor?
So really, where I daven on a regular daily basis, I daven by some of the Alter Rebbe, which is more Kalin Chassidus.
Yeah.
But I'm saying the Kalin Chassidus, they don't really push so much this limud. And since I started off with that, I was always looking for someone to continue further with, Pnimis Satar. I found that Morgenstern, he has many shurim on the Kol Lashon. You could hear early shurim from 15, 20 years ago, which today, even though he's on a very fast pace, but those shurim he mamash gave from Aschilim, and that's I really started from those. And the difference between him is also, like I said before, is that he's giving over like a very broad picture, meaning that Avodah Hashem starts with the Arizal and the whole Gilui, and how the Baal Shem Tov, and really, one of his main things is Chabad, how that really gives the whole pnimius of the whole Ari and the whole Avodah.
Okay, so according to Rav Morgenstern, what I'm hearing, that the actual avodah of Chassidus is explained explicitly in Teres Chabad. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, specifically like more the way his avodah is. Every Rebbe, every mashpia is different, but just explain a little how Rav Morgenstern works, is that he davens the Siddur Reshash, which many people are familiar. Takes many years just to master the Siddur, to even be able to turn the pages and know what you're doing. And Torah's Chacham, there's a Siddur Torah's Chacham, which is his own Siddur with many asafas. Up in the Sefer Torah's Chacham. So meaning B'chitzonius, he's really, you would say, very advanced Makubal. But for those who hear the other Torahs, his Shiurim, his Shalashuddis Torah, you hear how everything is really revolving about the bittul and the hergish of the bittul of the or b'mor, and these words you don't find. And like he says it over, it's all coming from the Tanya and from the Alter Rebbe, the Rashab, from the later Memor. So in other words, that even though Chitzonius, his avodah is the Siddur Reshash with his Isafis, but he lives his whole pnimius is the avodah that Chabad is giving, and that's what the whole Siddur, all the Kavanahs. And really, in more words,
yeah, go ahead.
In more words, really, you could the people that understand really what's going on. The whole Siddur is just really soy to feel that bittul that Chabad is really trying to bring out.
So it's interesting because I was reading in Rabbi Aharon of Staroshelye where he talks about, it's in the Hakdama, I think, to Shari HaYichud HaEmunah, where he talks about that he quotes from the Alter Rebbe that there's two types of yirah. There's the yirah which comes about through hisbonenus, and then after that brings through that hisbonenus in Yichud brings to yirah, and then afterwards, then there's the other type of contemplation on the divine names, on the Shemos, and that is more to bring shashuim to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to bring pleasure to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, it's not a prerequisite. It's something which maybe can happen afterwards.
Right. Really, you bring up a good point. In other words, the Rabban Staroshelye and the Hakdama, what you're saying over is that he explained Barichus, the whole mahalach of the Alter Rebbe, is how he took the whole Kabbalah Sari and explained. He starts with the Hakdama that there's a stira. Some places it says that you're not allowed to learn Kabbalah until you're roi, and some places it says that Kabbalah is meant for everyone. So he brings from the Alter Rebbe that there's two beginners in Kabbalah. There's the chelik, which is meant to be misboinen when the oilam is in the animal vadoi, and that is meant to bring a true ahavah and vekas, and that's what he says the Baal Shem Tov and the Magid and the Balatanya took out from the Kabbalah Harizal. And he says this chelik is for everyone, and that's really the whole Sefer Tanya and Shaykh B'munah to explain. Then he says there's a second chelik of the Kabbalah, which that's only meant for really the Bali Madrego, which that's what you were saying before, is go into the Shemus and into the Oilums.
What struck me was that he describes that as just, that brings Shashuim to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words,
it's not necessary for the avodah sabeini. It's not necessary for the regular person's avodah.
Yeah, it's more like extra. It's extra. You want to give God joy and some kind of additional pleasure. You do these yichudim. Shem yichud. Yeah.
Because really, the Shaykh is also really the avodah of beinin.
Yeah. But it's interesting because it says in that letter which the Baal Shem Tov sent to Gershon Kittv, and he said that he had the Aliyas Neshama, his soul went up and went into the room of Mashiach, of the Messiah, up in heaven, and he asked him, Amos Kasimar, when are you going to come? Sir, when are you going to come? And all those, when Mashiach's going to come? And he said two things, or three things he actually said. One of the things he said, when your well springs go on the outside. And he also said when everyone's able to miyachid yichudim k'moischa, when everyone's able to be miyachid yichudim just like the Baal Shem Tov was able to, which are through the Shemos. He was called Baal Shem because he knew these names and was able to do these divine unifications with the name. So it's interesting that you have this concept that maybe it's avodas tzaddikim on the one hand, on the other hand, Mashiach, in this letter, Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov that he's going to come when everyone's able to do that.
So it is a good question according to Chassidus about how they translate those words, but no,
I think they miss it out. A lot of the latter day, in latter day Chabad, you don't see those additional words added.
Yefutzah and Nisechachutza part.
Yeah, and they don't talk about the Miyachid Yechudim part of it. That's.
But one Nakuda which I found very important in this piece you're mentioning from the Avram Staroshelye is that today there are a lot of mashpiyim. Not removing. I know just recently in the Yerushalayim, someone gave a whole shir for like over 100 young life to explain how to make yichudim and aliyahs. And the real Ram Abelachia, the real heavy aliyahs in yichudim.
Yeah.
And his whole idea was because this is what it says in the letter of the Baal Shem Tov. But what comes out very important from this Avram Staroshelye is that you can't jump to that second step until you have the first step. Meaning, you first have to have a real yisoid and base on ahavah and dveikus that comes from hisbonenus or real bittul, and only then could you go to step 2 and do aliyahs and yichudim. It's a very strong point that even though today maybe people are fixing, this Nukudi saying is missing out, but the Rabbi Shalom teaches that it's a 2-step thing. You can't jump to step 2 without having a real heavy foundation in the first step.
And it also struck me that he thinks it's optional. It seems like, at least, he seems that it's optional. It's nice to have.
Meaning he's not mechayiv the regular average yid to make those shames and aliyahs and yichudim.
There's a line here which I found to be very strong. Just because not everyone's b'nei aliyah, therefore, how can you say about them that they don't have any chilek in this whole thing? Meaning
that obviously there's for everyone. There's a chilek which is for everyone.
He's outraged by it. There's certain things which he says that he seems like he's outraged by. In other words, like it can't be that if you're not a b'nei aliyah, in other words, you're not doing these yichudim, therefore everyone's boizim. So tell me, so you learned Samach Vav and Ayin base first before you learned Avram Staroshelye? Yeah,
the Sefer I learned Tanya, and really, when I finished the Sefer Tanya, I went to Oitzes Chaim from the Chaim Vital because that's what they were advising. And then after
which
that,
mashpiyim at that time?
Between Morgenstern, between Moshe Erlanger. Just to bring out the point, I see it's a little different. You grew up in the regular Chabad Avirah. So I'm saying, I don't.
100%.
So for me, it's not so familiar. I'm saying I was born in Crown Heights, but I used to go for some with Beis Hashaver, but I don't really know the ins and outs how it works. But I'm assuming that it works like most Chassidus in that the song from the Rebbe is what we learn, and it's besides obviously the limit and the avodah, but it's certain emunah which is in the tzaddikim, but you don't look to go at the back. That's like by most Chassidus. The mashpiyim today, they want what's going to work for the actual oivdim.
We should differentiate for the audience the mashpiyim of Lubavitch because it's interesting. Like I've now come to a. Sorry.
Yeah, same word, but we mean something different.
It's the same word exactly. It's interesting. I've now differentiated, and maybe we'll jump ahead a little bit because I maybe you agree or disagree with me, but I think that there's Doira Shvi Chabad, which is Lubavitch today. And then there's Chabad of people who learn Torah's Chabad but are not Torah Shvi Chabadnikim. Do you know what I mean?
That's the example that I'm giving you here. That it's the Torah Shvi Chabad is obviously the ones that are continuing the messiahs of being a chassid from the Rebbe, which is obviously a Mordecai thing. That's one group. But the group which more I'm affiliated with, which there's a lot, is I know Matazov from Stichin and Munich Yisrael, between my Morgenstern, between Moshe Erlanger. There's many that the reason why they're learning Chabad is because not necessarily because they're looking to be a chassid from any Rebbe, it's more that they're looking to get to the Madregas, the Baal Shem Tov, and what the Talmidim want us to get to. So therefore, they're using this form to reach these places, which in which my lashon is more to reach the diagonals of bittul through the hisbonenus. So that's just being a little difference between but there's obviously miles and concerns in each way, but it's just two different worlds.
Yeah, it's interesting because the way I've seen it in my mind is that if you learn this last Lubavitch Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, if you learn his Torahs, so he has a mahalach, a theory, if you like, or which for him is very practical, where he says every single mamale makim. What does it mean if you have the Mittler Rebbe was mamale makim? Started from the beginning, right? You have the Magid was mamale makim of the Baal Shem Tov according to Chabad, and then according to Chabad, the Balatanya or the Alter Rebbe was mamale makim of the Magid. The Mittler Rebbe was mamale makim of the Balatanya, not Reb Maran, by the way. Yeah. Then every single one of them were mamale makim, which means that they had everything that the previous person had, plus their own thing. So they were mamale his makim means they took up his entire place. So they had everything that the previous one had, plus their own thing. So each one was a little bit more moisif on all the previous ones, until the Deir Shvi, obviously he was mamale makim all of them, plus his own thing, right? So that was his mahalach. I don't know, did you ever see that? But
you have the famous Basi Lagani.
Yeah, exactly. So it's what we would call in academic language supersessionist, right? It totally supersedes what went before it, and because of that, you really only need to learn the Rebbe, basically, and you learn others in order to be able to understand the Rebbe. In other words, if you learn to understand the Rebbe's Torah, whereas someone who's not a Deir Shvi Chabadnik, he's able to take each Rebbe for what that Rebbe is, and doesn't feel that he has to be a chassid of any particular one of them, and is able to take the Torahs of all those Rebbes and assimilate them in the way that it's meaningful to them. Would you agree with that?
Because like I mentioned before, that's really the difference in the backgrounds that what you just explained is the real beer. And what you explain really by every chassidus, you have that idea. Just by every chassidus, you don't have so much Torahs that you have, each one bring down a new madreg of Torah, but each Rebbe, obviously, that's the mamshich and that's the hemshich, and you have to have the full amuna to connect to that. Today there's a nusach of mashpiyim where they're not against that because obviously that's a very special thing. But the stress is more, instead of putting a very big stress on amun of tzaddikim, the stress is more to learn the Torah of tzaddikim and bring out your own koiches to get as close as you could to the madregas where they wanted you to.
He brings in that go over there. When you say Moshe Agei Maisa LaMaisa Avodah Avram Yitzchak Yaakov, he's talking about that every single person is mechuyev l'shtad lav avodas yizur hisbonenus b'chinas ha'amakas hadas b'yichudi yisparach, etc., etc. So in other words, that idea of being able to say that you're going to reach the levels of the avoisai, not just of one particular person, but avoisai.
The stress is more, obviously, even in this world of mashpiyim, obviously we understand that when we're learning any of these tzaddikim, we're learning Torah of a tzaddik emes, and if we would write our own Torah, we can't compare it with Chalal because we're not tzaddik emes. But again, the nukud is that we're trying to use our own koiches to reach the madregs that the tzaddikim got to. Fuke, where the stress is more to have the munah tzaddik and just continue the messiahs. So it's two different mahalchim, and where you're stressing your avodah. And that's why I mentioned before. So like after Sefer Tanya, I went to Oitzes Chaim, first to understand basic Kabbalah Sari, and then I continued in the Chassidus.
And then you went to learn Samach Vav, or you learned something in between?
So I did a little and the basic, the Chavis Hanor, but then I went straight to Samach Vav. And let's say what it helped a lot is that a lot of the small words, had a whole different mashmois, meaning what could be very hard in Samach Vav for many people is that when it talks about Zer'ampen, Malchus, Aliyas, even if you learn a lot of Chassidus, but always these terms make it hard to understand what you want. If you have some sort of background in Oitzes Chaim Kabbalah Sari, when you see this word, you appreciate it, and you're able to go through it much further. And really understand. I learned some about really a little different than most in Chabad. I actually went through all 60 Maimorim in a year's time, because my focus was more like to get the picture of what he wanted, because some of it, besides that, each Maimon you can learn for a year, but it's also a sefer for itself, meaning he has a binyan that he starts from Aleph and he gets you to Taf, and there's a lot of middle. So to get the binyan clear, I felt that it was kedai to go through the whole sefer fast. Then I started going through it again a little slower.
Yeah, when we learned in yeshiva, and this was many years ago, I was 19, 20 years old, 27, 28 years ago. In that year, when we learned Samach Vav, we learned the whole sefer. At least I learned the whole sefer. But there were a number of mamorim, the hemshech of Vayelach, which we learned Be'iyun. And so there was 7 or 8 mamorim after that one and 7 or 8 mamorim later, which we learned Be'iyun. But we did go through, at least I did, and I don't think everyone did, but a lot of, they had
like a Bekir Seder to get the heck of.
There was a kvutz of us which went through the entire sefer and learned it really well. Maybe 5 or 6.
Now, I feel that's something a lot of people don't have, and it's very important because when you go through the whole sefer and you understand really what it means, you get a whole different picture of what it means when he says that Chassidus is the Ein Sof Sheberad Lo, and it's based on really Ein Beis. But if you go through some above, even you have a whole different appreciation for what these words mean. You know, only learn a few Maimorim Be'in. It's much harder to get that.
I want to plug your kuntras here. I don't know how people can get it, but there's a kuntras here which Rabbi Avram put together called Kuntras Darkei Chassidus Derech Avodah, which I thought was a really excellent sikkum of not just Chassidus Chabad, but also how it applies to Avodah. And in that, you quote also, which I think is what you're mentioning now.
And then, in that, it's also like mentions the PSS, which he's also a big Chiddush, where he explains that sees is the animal avodah. He explains he's really in a very Chabad nusach, that the Baal Shem Tov came to be Megal Kos animal avodah, Pshutei Mamish, even in the Kalim. And then he goes Barich to explain how Chabad brings it out, how Kalim brings it out. So that's a very Yuchadik Sefer where he shows you the Nekudah that Chabad talks about, that's really the Baal Shem Tov. And every Chassidus brings it out in their own. And then he says you could put them together.
I really appreciated that you also brought from these other sources, like the Piatetzna. Along those lines, though, I always thought to myself that there was a certain antinomian aspect of Chabad. In other words, like if you take Chabad Chassidus to its nth degree, it becomes almost antinomian. In other words, the Tachten in Tachten Mata Imeno. B'derech you talk about Stira B'Tachtonim, Stira B'Tachtonim. But that stress on not just Tachtonim, but Tachten Shein Tachten Mata Imeno, that concept is a little bit like the idea of, or the Baal Tshuva, Mokish Baal Tshuva in the Mafilat Stikin Gurim in Michin Lamrit. That concept, it's very close to what Yosef from the Yetzesna, this idea of not just Kadeshas B'Mutalach, but there could be the potential of Kadeshas B'Osalach. In other words, to being Mila, the Dvarim.
Even the Oil Masi itself is something that has to be Kodesh.
Yeah, but Ad Kedei Kach, even, you know what it says in Tanya, that the person should never say that they're going to sin in order they should be able to do tshuva, because it could be the Ema speaking beyond last is tshuva. Maybe they won't end up being able to do tshuva. They won't have time, or they won't have the ability, the opportunity to do tshuva. But be'etzem, this idea of the Baal Tshuva to be able to be ma'ale, even to be able to elevate even that which is forbidden, is the highest madrega. In other words, that's really where it ultimately leads, in logically at least.
So you have in the last shar of the shar avodah where you also go through that barichus. When he says that he's married from the same nekudas, the avodah, chas v'shalom, person can't do any averes, but if he was nichshel, then the avodah of tshuva is not just to have charot on what you did, but rather now you'll be able to be mile even the klipas hatzmeis, which that's the biggest illusion.
So that's why it's not surprising to me that the Piatetzin is also very similar to this, because he's known for this semi-antinomian perspective. So, which to me, like, when you take that to the nth degree, a lot of Chabad today it's very understandable what you have today in Chabad today, where you have people who are the etc. People are going out there and to all kinds of places where to a lot of the people in the, let's call it the Haredish world, don't understand it. They find it very difficult to understand this concept. I remember Rabbi Gans. Do you know who Rabbi Gans is? Aaron Gans, who was a teacher in Morristown. He probably still teaches in Morristown. And he used to be a Satmar, and he used to say that in Satmar, they used to talk about Lubavitchers, that they're being friends with the Tzionim, and to them, they could never really get out of their head that it's just because they're Grob Jungen that they want to be friends with the Tzionim. It was like, it must be that the only reason why they want to become friends with the Tzionim is because they're such coarse individuals. And so that's a perspective that you might have. But if you understand that this is kind of part of the ideology from the very beginning, which leads logically to places where other people who are within that same milieu might look at it and say, that's crossing the line.
Though his personal advice is a little different, because what he's stressing is, maybe you'd say that's more what the first daughters of Chabad explained. His more stress is to be able to reach that bittul that the Baal Tanya and really the Mittler Rebbe and Rabbi Staroshelye were marathon, which what you're explaining now, even though you're saying it's the last madrega, but that bittul is less felt. So really the shleimus would be if someone could bring down that bittul all the way to the bottom, that would be the shleimus of the avodah.
In many ways, it has the antinomian aspect to it, but it lacks the pnimis of it. In other words, because if you actually learn Aaron and others, you actually find that what they're trying to get to is it's all in the nefesh bahamis. In other words, that dida b'tachtonim is all happening within the person's avodah, within the person's individual psyche. It's not, doesn't mean that you go out there and become friends with the not from person and try to get on their level and bring them in. It's all an internal struggle that the person's having with their own nefesh bahamis, and that tachton is their nefesh bahamis, not somebody else's nefesh bahamis.
And obviously, and that avodah would be much more pnimi, because the matter is to feel that bittul within your own nefesh. And mashenkin, if you're doing like you're saying the shlichus, so even though it's a whatever the beer is, you're saying it's even in the tachton, but that pnimi is much harder to be felt, since you're in much more of a chitzoni, you're going much more outwards, and you're missing that heritage. And really, the Chabad, again, if you look barichs in the Alter Rebbe and the Rabbi Staroshelye, that the whole matar of Chabad was to reach that bit, to feel that heritage of the bittul to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And after that heritage is what's very important, not just like an extra credit or something.
Yeah. yeah. No, that's the whole point of it. Yeah.
The whole point of it is the bittul that we're supposed to reach through this bonus.
Yeah.
Right.
So let's talk about the differences between the Alter Rebbe and Rabbi Aharon, because what really struck me is a few things. Learning Tanya, obviously, which I'd learned many years ago, and now learning Rabbi Aharon. First of all, in his Akdama, in Shari Yichud Ve'emunah, not his Akdama, his Pesach Mavu Hasharim. So that's like the preface, and then there's the introduction. They're very different types of literature. The preface and the introduction are very, in other words, it feels that
what you think Pesach Mavu Hasharim is more to explain you about the Sefer. The Akdama is actually getting you into the first chapter.
Yeah, but also the way they're written, the style is very different. Feels. But he talks about like why he didn't get a haskama, why he didn't go out there and get approbations for the book. And in some sense, his qualifications for writing the book, that he spent 30 years as a student of Shnizam V'Liadi of the Alter Rebbe. And then he says he never learned from anyone else. And he was able to, it seems like he's saying that he was Yoyed L'Soif Da'atoi. Since he listened to him and then worked really hard to understand him, he understood him in a way in which no one who actually just read the words could understand him. Is that what he's saying?
He explains, Barich, that at the beginning, if he didn't understand what his rabbi told him, he would go back to him and horrible. And really before that, he explains barichas that when it comes to these inyanim, you have to be very careful not to take it wrong, because it can be totally taken to the wrong places. And that's why he wrote the Sefer after learning by the Baal Tanya for 30 years, where he really had a real havanya until he got to the emes of his rabbi's Torah.
Yeah, but then it seems that although he says he's only explaining what his rabbi, the Rabbeinu Nishma Seydmi he calls him, taught him, there are certain telltale signs to me, it seems, that he's going a little bit further. So tell me what you think of this. Do you agree with that or not?
Yeah, so I'm saying two things. There is a maamar from Morgenstern where he explains what's the chiddush from Rabbi Staroshelye. It's in the Sefer Yerucham Shemesh. The Nekuda which he writes is that Rabbi Staroshelye explained Torah's Chabad in the Dag of Kesef, Shenking the Baal Tanya, and he says even the Rebbes after, I don't know if they didn't want to, but they weren't Megala Chassidus in such a high dagger. They were Megala in the Dag of Chacham. That's the codes. But what I felt like what you're saying, you could see from the actual Sefer, what it seems like is that, like in between the lines, he seems to be saying that he's a Talmud of the Baal Tanya, and he's going to tell you what the Baal Tanya didn't say, but really wanted to say. And what that means, in other words, that he's explaining it in a higher dagger than what it was given over in its face value. Mashenki in the Alter Rebbe, we know, even though he was very marchiv, but he didn't go away from the words of Baal Tanya. Meaning, the Alter Rebbe, we know that he made a big harchav in the Baal Tanya, but he stayed with the Torah from his father. He didn't make like a new Torah. Mashenki in the Rabbi Staroshelye, it seems like that he, in between the lines, seems to be telling us that he really understood what's, bipnimis in the heart of the Baal Tanya, but which he didn't want to say clear, and he's going to write it out clear for us.
So he's not Mosef Midile, or at least he's not making as if he's Mosef himself from his own, adding his own things. But in a sense, he is adding his own things because
he's telling you something which wasn't really given over yet.
Yeah, but the other thing is, the Balatanya wrote Likutei Amarim first, and then Shayachut Ve'emunah. Whereas there's a subtle difference. Rabbi Aharon doesn't go with that same kind of perspective. He first writes his Shari Yichud Ve'emunah and then his Shari Avodah. which is supposedly a parish on the Kedei Amorim. So, although the Alter Rebbe, I think he thought of first doing Shaykh Lemona and then the Kedei Amorim, he in the end, he
in the
put the Kedei Amorim first.
In the Agdama to the Shaykh from the Baal Tanya, it says, maybe Kamoshi is Bar or something like a Lashon, which seems that it was written first.
Yeah.
And what they explain is, I think Rabbi Aharon in this parish, he brings the memory of Chassidim, the Alter Chassidim or something, that it seems like the Alter Rebbe had a happening to write it first, and then he, the maskana is that it should be second, but he kept that Lashon to show that there is such a makom. So in other words, that's a little mechazik what you were saying before, that it seemed like Rabban pulling out the previous hakavana, which the Balatanya didn't want to give over straightforward for everyone.
But in a sense, he's also chaylik on him, in a sense, right? In other words, you could say he's disagreeing with him because in his work he puts.
Or if you want to say the way I explained it before, is that the Balatanya gave over Chassidus for the klal, and therefore he felt that first you have to have the avodah beinoni, and then you could go to the haskalah. Mashaying the Rabban Staroshelye, which was really being a galach Chassidus, like exactly what it is. So he gave in really the proper order, which he explains himself, is that he says if you don't know the yichud amuna, really you can't really work on the avodah. Technically, it makes more sense this order to the yichud amuna first.
Although he does say shav l'chol nefesh, right? He says. Yeah, he says that this is for everybody, and basically says that he worked very hard in it, and every single word is important. And if you're a scholar, you're going to be able to learn it a few times and really get depth. But even if you're not, you'll still get a lot from it. Right. So in other words, he also thought that this was for everybody, but he still thought that you should first have Shaykh Dvemuna first, and then you should have the Kedei Amorim.
That meaning he felt that he wants to give all the fullers, and therefore, for everyone, like he writes, that if someone goes through the Sefer quickly, he writes, he won't understand the word. That's what he writes over there. But he says he'll still gain from it, because like, the Nekuda Ve'enim Elvadi, you'll end up seeing on every page, and you'll get a Hispa'alus for it. So in other words, there is something here which is offered for everyone, but he says that to really get what he wants, you really have to put koiches and havani into the Sefer.
Probably the Alter Rebbe would say the same thing about his farm, I imagine. The other thing which is interesting is his language is different. If you learn the Alter Rebbe, and then you learn Rabbi Aharon, it's a different language. For example, the koyach hapela, the idea of saying koyach hapela, and that's not Lashon which you find. This idea that, just for the audience, that he talks a lot about the idea of how it came about that you have this kind of yichud. How can you have this yichud? And then how can you have the fact that something looks like it's chalkos, something looks like it's multiplicity, but really it's one. That he says he comes from this koyach hapela, which means this wondrous power. Maybe that is elsewhere in Alter Rebbe. I don't remember it.
Oh, it's definitely not the regular. It's definitely a new Lashon, which by Rabban Staroshelye is found almost in every paragraph.
Yeah,
but you also have the bittul Rebbe. You also have that he didn't exactly. If I believe there's some sort of like line from the Tzemach Tzedek that he wasn't so happy with both. If maybe you would know what I'm talking about. I think he said under Rabban Staroshelye that he like changed the Lashonis, and he wasn't so happy either that the bittul Rebbe was so marchid, and that's why we know the Tzemach Tzedek, his Torahs were more like the Baal Tani's Torahs itself, just he was like Mesader, but he didn't change, not by Chav or change the Lashonis. So I'm just bringing out that you see the bittul Rebbe also, he came with what he felt was the way he had to give it over.
Yeah, and you might argue that the bittul Rebbe, which takes us into the next part of it, the differences between the bittul Rebbe and Rabbi Aharon, because you see that where the description of the prayers of the Alter Rebbe, there's this story of him that he got so physically emotional, or the manifestation of his emotions was so physically manifest that he would punch his fist on the wall next to where he was davening, where he was praying, until he would draw blood. And the Chassidim had to put some kind of cover or some kind of cushions there so that he wouldn't hurt himself. So it was a very physically exciting experience, the prayer of the Alter Rebbe, whereas the bittul Rebbe, he didn't move. So in other words, maybe he was also chaylik on his father in some way. He also disagreed with his father in some way.
I'm saying you don't really have to say it's like a disagreement. You can say they each bring out from their own koiches, from their own perspective, how they feel it should be given over.
But they did, in their teachings, it was different. And that came out in the differences between Rabbi Aharon and the bittul Rebbe.
And what you're saying with the Kabbalah, maybe you could explain that a little, is that if you learn Shaykh of Amunah and then you learn the Shaykh of bittul Rebbe, so you have to be like a real master to pick up the differences. But if you learn the Sha'ar avodah, especially in the Agdama, and then you learn the Kuntres Hispa'alus, so there you see clear a difference between the Rabban Staroshelye and the bittul Rebbe. And that is that on the conscious Hispa'alus, the Mittler Rebbe is very marche barichus that the Hispa'alus has to be like emes without any sheker, and therefore the Mittler Rebbe has to come from the haskalah itself. That has to cause the Hispa'alus. And there's no room to say that you should create your own Hispa'alus. It's not coming from the seichel eliki. I think the Rabbi Staroshelye, he repeats this many times in the Akdama and within the Sefer, that to get to the Hispa'alus that you're supposed to get to, if you don't bring a chitzonistic Hispa'alus, you're never going to reach it. So that's big nekuda, which is a different barichas. There is one saying the word with koich hapela, when you use on the Rabbi Staroshelye that whole chassidus revolves around koich hapela, that's like a much more exciting term. So in the Shaykh of Amunah, you see also how like his Torah he's coming like much more hergishtig, which the rest of Chabad also. They're not really coming to excite you. They're more coming to explain you step by step exactly ahavah, barichos, the proper hisbonenus, and all the steps you have to understand. So that just brings out a little difference in the Shaykh of Amunah and the Shaykh of the Mittler. In other words, the lashon of the Shaykh of Amunah is a much more. The lashonis are not so much that you're supposed to be misboinen ba'ahavah in the inyanim, but rather it's supposed to like actually excite you to try to get a bittul and a hergish.
Yeah.
And that's why the lashon and koich hapelen haflu pele and so on. That's much more matim for this mahal.
Yeah, it's interesting. He also says, and I didn't underline it, but I should have perhaps. He says, in the Pesach Mavasharim to Shaykh Amunah, he says, so the whole idea of Yediyah, of Yidata Yom V'Shvei Salavecha, to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that whole thing has to result in a person actually being physically excited about it. And if he doesn't have that, then that's not called knowledge. In other words, it's almost a waste of time to have learned this entire sefer if it doesn't result in some kind of actual excitement. Yeah. So I'm calling this season of the podcast Seeking Ecstasy. And the translation of Hispa'alus, some people translate as ecstasy. So for him, this whole idea of getting to this kind of ecstasy, that's the whole point of it. And without that, you really have nothing, it seems.
Right. But again, I'm saying the middle of conscious Hispa'alus, he really wants to get to it also. It seems that the house there is more that it has to be the seichel eliki which brings you there, and therefore there's no room to bring it. He wants you to right away get into this Hispa'alus, that right away you're in the sugya, so to say, and then you work by it step by step. This is something which in the Sha'aravad he also explains barichas that he says really the madregas which he calls avos and avarabo, really it's meant for Avram Yitzchak and Yaakov and these big tzaddikim, not for us. But he explains that every yid has his reach. So it's really the same thing with Hispa'alus, is that a person has to be ma'or the Hispa'alus right away, and even though he understands that he's far from what the Rebbe's Hispa'alus were, but he has to at least have the whole thing here and then work his way up.
So even if that Hispa'alus, that excitement he gets is really because he's feeling it, there's a yesh which actually feels this Hispa'alus, and maybe it comes from, perhaps even from his nefesh b'amis, from his animal soul. Still in all, he can then work on that to, over time, refine it so that it's less of his animal soul and more of his godly soul. But he has this kind of striking term that if you don't have any Hispa'alus, any ecstasy at all from the beginning, and you don't allow any of it, then you don't even get onto the first base. You don't get onto the first rung of the ladder. And if that's the case, he has this lashon, you're extinguishing the flame of service of God entirely, because no one's ever going to start with it. That's seems to be...
Then the nefesh b'amis will take its place.
Yeah. And even worse, all you're going to have now is excitement of olam hazeh, of this physical world, because you're never going to have any kind of excitement of, which seems to me to be a stinging criticism in some way, at least of the perspective of the Mittler Rebbe. Or did you take it that way when you read that?
No, definitely it seems that he's coming to argue. Just if you want to understand the Mittler Rebbe, what you could explain is that it seemed like two different gishot in what is the Chassidus. Like we said before, the Mittler Rebbe was more, he wanted more the haskalah, and that the seichel eliki should bring out the Hispa'alus. And therefore, by the Mittler Rebbe, there was no room to make what we call not a real Hispa'alus. If the whole matter is that the seichel eliki is supposed to bring you there, then a chitzonistic Hispa'alus just seems to be like the wrong thing to bring in. So that's why that's just explaining a little the mahalach of the Mittler Rebbe. The Rabbi Staroshelye is just saying that lamaisa, if you're going to ignore it in the beginning, you might not, like you're saying, you might not get it.
But he has this very striking term, where he says, "Ein tzaddik ba'aretz asher," it's not his term, obviously. He quotes the pasuk which says, "Ein tzaddik ba'aretz asher yaseh v'le'achta." There's none righteous upon the earth which does good and sinneth not. Right? There's no, and he interprets that to mean that even the greatest tzaddik, and maybe he said Moshe Rabbeinu, who was a spaklari yirah, he was able to see Hakadosh Baruch Hu in this kind of way, face to face, upon him. He didn't have any yeshrus in his avodah at all, but every single other tzaddik has a little bit of it. So, in other words, like he almost is saying that which the Alter Rebbe wants is lo kayam, doesn't exist. This kind of pure ecstasy where you're totally losing all sense of self entirely. There's no self, doesn't exist. It's just pure divine intellect, which is shining from the godly soul into the animal soul to the degree the animal soul has totally lost its sense of self entirely. It's been that, he says, like almost doesn't exist.
So again, even though the Alter Rebbe does give Teda of Madrigas, but you're saying practically speaking, it definitely seems much more practical what the Rabbi Staroshelye is telling us.
Rabbi Aharon seems to think that it doesn't exist. It seems to me. In other words, it's very elitist. What it comes out is that these two types of service, of avodah, service of God, one is very elitist, which is the Alter Rebbe, and basically everyone else. There could be yesh kanei lam b'sha'achas. There are some people who perhaps can have this momentary mystical experience where they're totally transformed. And that can happen to some people if they get some kind of divine inspiration, which is very rare. But beyond that, the idea of being able to do the service and really getting there is almost impossible. It's for the very, very elite. And everyone else.
So again, even though Hispa'alus, he gives 10 steps, but you think even that first step is hard to get to.
That's what it seems.
Right.
What's your take on it?
It's more, the way I understand is that the Alter Rebbe was obviously going over his mahalach, and which was that the seichel eliki, the actual Torah, is supposed to make the Hispa'alus. So for someone that, if that works for him, then it'll work. But for many people which that won't work, they can learn Chassidus and they won't get Hispa'alus. And really, I remember seeing one of Yitzchak Ginsburg's farm, the Tzemach Tzedek, he changed a little the mahalach of his hisbonenus because he saw that the Chassidim weren't getting to what the Alter Rebbe wanted. So that's why he made Maimorim, that they could get some sort of Hispa'alus from just a Maimor. Mashaying the Alter Rebbe, he went through the whole Seder Staroshelye. Like I said before, every davening you have to be hisbonenus in the whole Seder Staroshelye before you start the davening. So you see from that is that even by the next generation, it was very much harder to get to the Hispa'alus that the Alter Rebbe was wanted. But what you bring out that by the Rabbi Staroshelye, he gives much more room that every person should, wherever he's holding, just make a Hispa'alus and learn about the Koich HaPele and the Haflu Pele. And as much as that brings you, if you're on step one, that's a good starting point, and then you have to build yourself higher and higher.
Yeah. It's interesting because at the very end of what I found really striking, the end of Kunsh's Hispa'alus, he talks about how people of his generation, he said they're just making jokes. They're too lighthearted and they're laughing too much. They're not serious enough for this stuff. And he has this idea that really to be able to get there, you have to have melancholy. You have to be a Morish Chayra. In your mother's milk, you have to have been this very kind of depressive kind of person. So that's another kind of bar which he has, which I don't see in Rabbi Aharon at all. Do you see it?
By Rabbi Aharon, he pushes any Hispa'alus that you could get to, even though he stresses that there's a yeshus involved and it's not good, but just start. Someone really told me together, maybe it's true, that the Rabbi Staroshelye, you could say, is like much more, in a way, he's more similar to the regular Chassidus, which were, their main thing was the Midas. Because really, the whole idea of the Baal Shem Tov is to bring the ahavah into the Kelim. And the chiddush of the Alter Rebbe was that he brought it through the Chachma Bina V'das. He held that's what's going to bring the ahavah to every year in a proper oath. But if you're going to go totally just with the Chachma Bina V'das, so then it'll be much harder to get to the Midas. I'm saying the Rabbi Staroshelye from his whole lesson that he's much more anointed to the regular Chassidus that you have to be working straight on to the ahavah and Dveik.
It's really interesting because Chassidus Chabad, I can't remember the exact where it says it, but I'm sure it's in many places, where it says the whole idea of Chassidus Chabad is the Shanas Teva Midosav or Midosav Hativim. There's two Lashonos which are given. But the concept is that the idea of learning Chassidus and hisbonenus is in order to change your midas, in order to become a better person. There's in Kunshas HaTfilah from from the Rebbe Shab, and I'm not sure if you've read it. I'm sure you have actually. So he laments over there later on in the Kuntras, where people are mispoinen, it seems, and they daven, and they still end up the same. Their midas haven't changed. They're still bad people. And then he gives a reason why that is. He explains that during tefillah, you also have to be mispoinen, not just hisbonenus on godless Hashem and the yichud, but also you have to bring back to think about the midas that you want to be mavara, that you want to elevate and you want to fix. You have to think about those as well. But the point is, he laments this fact that people are doing the avodah and they still remain with these bad midas, with these bad attributes, these bad character traits.
There's even, just to put in, there's even in the Beis Rebbe, where he brings from one of the Einukah from the Baal Tanya, I think he means the Kapuster, that he says that in Chabad they're very machmir on the Chabad and the Nahi, meaning on the Moichin and on the Lamaisa. But the actual Chagat, a lot of them don't make it. He writes that clear, and he says, but it's still better than the other Chassidim, because when Mashiach comes, he'll give them the spark, and then they'll be good to go. But the other Chassidim that don't learn Chabad, he's going to have to put them back in school and make Balchuvas. So, in other words, in the Beis Rebbe, it says that he agrees that the midas in Chabad are not stressed on enough, and a lot of people are not getting there. But he says that the mile is that when Mashiach comes, he'll just give it one push and it will be there. But you do see from that, it seems that the poil it wasn't such an easy mile to be ma'or avi and dveka through just the sichli.
Yeah, but even if you do, what I'm saying is, even if you do, this is what from the Rashab and Kunshtat Tefillah, even if you do, still, in the end,
you could still be with the actual change. To be able to change yourself, that's not such an easy.
Yeah, even that doesn't always happen.
Probably not going to happen.
Because theoretically, the idea is that once you're being made, the yirah nefesh elokih, and this is what I understood when I learned Krishna Hispa'alus, right? Once you're being made, the yirah nefesh elokih in the Rahamas is mispatal, it's ritzinus, etc. That itself causes a transformation that your midas should change. Is that the way you understand it?
Yeah, but I'm saying I understood that there's many steps involved. Meaning, if like in the Kunshas Hispa'alus, if you only ma'or the nefesh of the nefesh, of the nefesh hasichel, not nefesh halikos.
Yeah.
So that obviously won't be mahap of the nefesh habayim lagamri.
Yeah.
Once it's a long process.
Yeah.
And really, what you're being ma'or is that I think the Kaliska, the reason why he was, is because of this, is because to actually change the nefesh.
Rabbi Avram of Kalisk, we should. For those who don't know, we should explain who you're talking about. He was the Rabbi Avram of Kalisk was a very vociferous opponent of the Balatanya in his time. He was also one of the students of the Maggid.
And the reason why he was misnagid a little is because what you're saying is because for the average person through Sichlim to change himself is not so easy. So you're saying before that the Rabbi Staroshelye seems to not go so far as the Bittul Rebbe with that, and he stays with the regular students that Avad, you have to just probably work on Aviyah and Dveikus.
I think the fear was that Nimsa Kereach Mikan, right? Is what the fear is, right? If you're too elitist and then you're trying to, so maybe for the elite, for the creme de la creme, it works, which is for maybe the 1% or the half of the 1%. And for everyone else, they're just hanging along and they remain the same Grob Jungen. So like that, and then they don't understand. It's like a little bit like when we were brought up, we used to translate. Maybe you did too. We translated from Hebrew into Yiddish. So we ended up ignorant in two languages.
Right.
Both in Hebrew and in Yiddish. We didn't, because we translate from one language we didn't understand into another language we didn't really understand because our native tongue was English. You don't want a situation for the person who was very smart, he got two languages. But for everyone else, you ended up ignorant in two languages. So maybe that's the fear, which you end up when you have a very elitist perspective, which could become even more elite. It seems like with the Alter Rebbe became even more elite, and Rabbi Aharon is trying to say, let's maybe make this, we can keep people learning about my Yichudi Yisparech on the one hand. On the other hand, give them a little bit of
regular Hispa'alus.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the community of people in Yerushalayim and everyone else who's learning Teres Chabad who are not part of, I don't know if you would agree with calling the Chabad movement or Lubavitch movement today, Doira Shvi Chabad.
Like I mentioned before, there is, if you heard of it in America, but there is a whole branch here called Mani Yisrael that they have shul almost in every city here in Yerushalayim and Beitar, Beit Shemesh, that they're like Heichel Menachem Barpak, which they're trying to get to come part of the Dara Shvi. So that's one type of place where you'll find teaching like learning Chabad. But then you'll find, like I mentioned before, the other kilas, like Rabbi Morgenstern or Munis Yisrael, Stachin. These are many kilas which you could find someone that he'll put most of his hours of the day even into Chassidus Chabad. But it's just with a totally different, like Matorah, totally different Gisha, because his point is he's not trying to come a Chabad Chassid, and he's not trying to be Miskasher Dafka to the Chabad Rebbes, meaning obviously everyone wants to be Miskasher Tzadikim, but the point, like we mentioned before, is that he has a goal to what Chabad said that they want to bring you. His goal is to reach it. By the other places, they're more continuing the Messiahs, which, obviously that has its big milo, but it could be missing it now to bring out your own koiches to reach the main goal, which Chabad was set up to bring you.
So I can just see a Lubavitcher, a Der Shvi Lubavitcher, saying to themselves, we won. You got them snagdim learning Chassidus and learning Tanya. And the Rebbe said that there's two types of Jews, that they're Lubavitchers and not yet Lubavitchers. and I could see them saying that in a sense, these people, they're on the way. They don't realize it, but soon they'll become Der Shvi Lubavitchers too. What do you see as the difference between, or is there a difference, or is there a possibility that all of this becomes rolled in eventually into the Der Shvi Lubavitchers?
No, so like I mentioned before, it depends why you're learning the Chassidus. If it's on that it's Semani Yisrael learning the Chassidus, then you're right. He'll probably end up being Der Shvi if he stays there for a while. But if you're part of these mashpim, which I mentioned before, so they're not pushing that at all. And again, not that it's anything negative. It's just it's for a different point. They're trying to bring you to the bittul that Chabad wants you, and not dafka to be part of the Dara Shvi. So if someone's part of the groups which the mashpim are, so he probably won't get there because that's not the direction.
So to be clear, the direction you're learning. So as someone who's learning Chabad through in this kind of mahalach, you're also going to be learning the Likutei Maran, for example, right? You're also going to be learning the Sfas Emes. Maybe you're learning Kadishin. I don't know, but which is a whole different thing. But you're also going to be learning Moira Shemesh. Am I right, or?
Yeah, meaning you'll be learning like what's working. Like I'll give you a good example that if someone will go over to Mashpia and say, I'm learning Chabad for 3 years and it's not working, which I do. So the Mashpia might say, then try Likutei Maran, which I would assume if someone would go into Mind Yisrael, he's not going to get that answer. So meaning it's just a different approach to the whole thing. Like you mentioned before also that that's when I'm learning the Rashab, I don't connect that to the Dara Shvi, not because, anything negative or positive, but it's now I'm learning the Torah of the Rashab. When I learn the Torah of the Rebbe, I'm learning the Torah of the Rebbe to understand better Chassidus. The Rebbe obviously puts down Chassidus in a way which other Rebbeim, he brought it down mamish like on a silver platter, like it said. So meaning the actual limit is to get the limit clear and to get to the Matan where they're trying to bring you. But the movement of the Dara Shvi, that's not the stress at all.
The question is there ever a thought, this is such an amazing limud, etc. Maybe I should become a chassid of this particular, maybe I'm a chassid of the Rashab. Or like the people in Likutei Maran, they become Breslov chassidim when they start going to Uman.
So I'm saying the truth is that, like what I said before, since the approach is to reach the bittul, so we would want to look for people that are showing the bittul. Today in Chabad is very big, and I'm sure there's many that have this bittul. Overall, when you're looking at the large, it's something which is hard to find. Someone with that proper bittul, and
no one walks around and says, I'm bittul.
Yeah. I'll give you my thinking. Let's say Rabbi Morgenstern, he's a live example of bittul in his own way, in how he worked over the years to reach it. So that would be a place where if someone's learning Chabad because he wants to reach bittul, so he has a place, he has a live example of what it means to learn my moram and to be hisbonenus and to live a life of bittul.
Yeah.
And you have, let's say, that's what I was saying before, you have Munis Yisrael, you have many names of many that they're learning Chabad, and also not only Chabad, but they're live examples of the bittul that Chabad talks about.
Yeah, there used to be guys like that. There used to be like, I learned by Wolf Greenglass. I don't know if you heard of him in Montreal.
But it feels that today, like the more the doors go further, the more, the less, the more harder it is to find. So what it seems like hearing from other people is that it seems like the mashpim, which are live examples, if besides them, it seems it's hard to find other real life examples. They
Yeah,
might
but
be
I'm
around.
also not. I'm not b'toich inyanim either.
I'm saying I'm sure they're around, but
Yeah.
it also I think depends on what you're stressing on. Meaning, if you're stressing Dor Shvi and you're stressing Shlichus, so
Yeah.
these type of people might get pushed to the side because that's not the stress. But by the place of Mashpiyim, if you're not living bittul, then you're missing the boat. That's all they want from you.
Yeah, I was by a certain Rosh Yeshiva in Chabad's house, and he was complaining how the Bachrim weren't into learning as much. And at the same time, he was talking about somebody else, one of his relatives, who was a big shliach and had billionaires, and who he was. So I said to him, "Your Bachrim in Yeshiva, who do they want to be more like, you or your relative?" And he said, "They want to be more like my relative." So I said, "There you have your answer. You can't have both." I think the Rebbe really wanted that there should be able to be both. He expected that there could be both. But I think in a practical
Both,
sense,
you
we're
mean-
learning that it's very hard.
Both, you mean the pnimius and the
Yeah.
shlichus, you mean? Right.
Yeah, you can both want to be chavazach with billionaires and raise lots of money and spend your time in that world, and at the same time have the bittul of Revolve Greenglass or a bitch Meir Morgenstern. And maybe like for Anoshim Kerakenu, it's just not possible. So
Regular person, usually a person has like a goal, and it's like a one direction thing. It's hard to put two things together, even though that's a shleimus, but it's not so easy.
No one has it all. Okay, I know we've been going for quite a while. It's very late there, so I really appreciate you coming on and sharing this. I know that there are going to be a lot of people who are interested in this conversation. So to get your svarim here, first of all, can you pitch some of these svarim that people should know? Like this is you're the machab of this sefer, right? Called Shari Hispa'alus, and there's two of them which you are actually the mechaber of. I think I have here the Shari Hispa'alus and Shari avodah sayichut, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me it just so the people can know where to get these from and what they're about. Just a brief.
Yes. First, what it's about is that when I started learning the Rabbi Staroshelye, so for myself, I was making like a kitzur on the prokim, and then I saw also that I kind of sorted the Teuchen in Yonim al pi seder of the Shtalshlus and Kavanas and avodah. So these two svarim were really, while I was learning it, I made the kitzur prokim, which is in the back of the sefer. And let's say Shari Hispa'alus is taking Rabbi Staroshelye's words and explaining the Seder Hispa'alus, which is explained in Oitzes Chaim. So meaning it's not instead of the Shari B'Amuna, but rather it's a likud from the Shari B'Amuna in the order of the Seder Hispa'alus of the Chaim Vital. And the mile of that is that I feel it's a stepping stone to be able to get into the Shari B'Amuna. Because the Shari B'Amuna, like you mentioned before, is not the easiest sefer. And here, if you go through how he explains the Seder Hispa'alus, so you'll get the Nukuda what he wants, and you'll have a stepping stone to get into the Sefer. And today, a lot of people, they learn Oitzes Chaim, and they're not so familiar with Chabad, so by them it's much more interesting to hear that there's a Talmud of the Baal Tanya, which there's a likud according to Seder Hispa'alus. That's what I found also by many people. So meaning from this Sefer, you have something which will take a while to pull out of the Shari B'Amuna, which is to understand the Seder Hispa'alus according to the Torah Chabad and the Rabbi Staroshelye.
If someone wants in general to have a clarity and say the Shtalshlus is very helpful when you learn any minor. You're able to orient yourself where we're talking about. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, you can see in the background on my forum, I have a lot of Lakutim from Chabad today on Seder Hispa'alus. It's a kind of different nusuf, but you have them in Chabad a lot.
Yeah. So would you recommend someone who's not necessarily learning Rabbi Aharon of Staroshelye, but wants to have a good ahavah and say the Hispa'alus also learn this, or this is only if you want to learn Aharon?
No, so I heard from many people that they only learn Oitzes Chaim, that they felt they gained a lot from the Sefer because, like the Rabbi Staroshelye explains, that the Kabbalah of Chaim Vital itself is talking in the Chitzonius de Galoshin. It doesn't explain the Pnimius. So even for someone that just learned, if you go through the Shari Hispa'alus, you'll get a tam, a te'imo, how Chabad and the Rabbi Staroshelye gives you a pnimius, and it's really giving you the pnimius of the whole Kabbalah. So really, it's miyud for someone that just learned Oitzes Chaim, and it's miyud for someone that wants to go more barifus into the Staroshelye.
And what about someone who wants to learn, for example, Ranat, Samach Vav?
So for that, I'll tell you the truth, like you said before, it's a whole different sprach and it's a whole different lashon. If someone's dafka wants to go into Samach Vav, I don't know if this would be the best one, but it's more, I saw the tzibur that took it was more the ones that learned Oitzes Chaim and they want to understand the Kabbalah with the Chassidus. That's what I found. And same thing with the avodah Yichud.
Yeah.
Over there, the two chalakim, one chalik is the kavanus, the basic idea of kavanus, which if you ask a Svardish, it could be mecham, let's say the first bracha of Shmoneh for an hour, and you ask him what's the matar, he'll tell you the matar is to make the yichud zon at the end of davening. But then if you ask him what's the yichud zon about, maybe say who cares about it, he won't know what to tell you. But if you see how Avram Staroshelye and Chabad really explain what it means yichud zon, you get a whole different havana, what's the matar and what's the pnimius. And then the second half is explaining the dark avodah from the shari avodah. So really, in other words, there's Svarim for itself, and there are stepping stones to get to the Avram Staroshelye.
Okay, so you would recommend that people learn Shari Shalshus before they learn Shari Yichud V'Emunah, or at least together with it as a companion.
Yeah, at least together, because some Shari Yichud V'Emunah could be. I find many people they open it and they get like scared off. It's very long, and they don't, especially if someone doesn't know Chabad, he doesn't know what to say for what he wants, what's the message. So from the Shari Shalshus, at least you get small bits and pieces, and I feel it's a nice stepping stone.
There's one last thing I wanted to ask you, which is I found in the Akdamah Shari Yichud V'Emunah, which I found is different than a lot of other Chassidus. Maybe I just haven't learned enough about Chassidus. So I've learned a fair amount. That he really goes into the Mekayros, the Mehemna, he goes into the rarified, he goes into passages from the Zoyar, from the Eitz Chaim, etc. Whereas that kind of grounding in the previous texts, I haven't really found in other Sifrei Chassidus Chabad. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think there's a special reason for that also. I don't know if we have the time to discuss it, but I'll say it in a few words, and whoever, something with to say you'll understand it, is that the Rabbi Staroshelye, it's also something which is different than no Chabad. He has a very big zehirus when it comes to talking about these inyanim. Meaning Chabad's stress was always more to understand these high inyanim, the oil misal yoinim and the inam levadei. Rabbi Staroshelye, on the other hand, just in the Pesach Mavi Sha'arim, he gives you 3 conditions before you could even start saying a mashal on Elikus. He from the whole say how he has like a pachad when he talks about these high oilimus, especially in the opening of Havana and Asagan. He even says in the place that the Balatani was Meshabech, the Chaim Vital, they didn't speak about the Marie Sug's oilimus because there it's much more mustafa that you'll make a mistake in these places. So I feel in the Hagdam, what you're mentioning, where you go through many Mekayros, is because he's bringing out a certain Nekudo that the Eibush is partial with the Pshitas, and he wants to make sure that no one makes a mistake in that in. So I feel that Hagdam is like a special reason for it, and that's really part of the news why he does that.
It's very clear to me from there was a few Lashonos which he brought up. If a person like them quotes from the, I think, where basically he quotes some very sharp expressions, sharp for the Lashonos, probably as his heroes. But I actually took it differently. I took it that Wolf Greenglass used to make a joke that the Amaratzim, when they look at the end of Sefer Vayikra and they would see Shir Hashirim, they would say, ganze Stücke Lekudeter liegt da. Because they didn't understand that actually Shir Hashirim was Shir Hashirim before the Lekudeter. And so very often you will have people who learn Chat, like the Mamorim, they don't understand that they think they're quoting the Rebbe Rashab. Really, the Rebbe Rashab is quoting the Zoyar or is quoting Tal or the Arizal, etc. Whereas it seems like Rabbi Aharon is very careful to delineate the historical layers of the various Mekayros, that they don't become smished, they don't come all mixed in. That was the way I took it, but I appreciate
that's definitely true. No, I'm saying it really goes hand in hand, because when, let's say, a klal like Pasha V'Dachs Pshitas just is something that, because the Rashab said it in the 14th Maimer in the Haggadah, or if, Mashenkin, if understand that it's a Zoya and Eitz Chaim and a Raiva with sharp Lashonos, you won't get mixed up with that. So it's with this Nakuda that he really wants to make sure that he'll walk away very clear with this cloud. And just one more Nakuda he quotes in the Akdamo. And we didn't find it in the Sefer Shemim when the Makad Moin. He was actually quoting a different Sefer, which is called Tzad Nachor. And that's the Sefer from Shemim Makad, which he was finding one of the Shabsei Tzvi Chever. It seems that he had that Sefer in front of him, so that would be another reason why you could see why he's so careful with these Inyanim, because it seems like he was scared someone might fall into those mistakes on the Yichud which they had.
One of the things I'm very grateful to you for reprinting this in Oisius, which are easy to read, because the previous ones were more difficult to read, and this really makes it chaya to be able to learn these Sfarim. And whereas the people back then, it was even harder to learn these Sfarim because the printing was so hard to get through. And I'm not sure whether all all the periods and the commas, etc., are those Sufis? I didn't look at the original.
I had an editor from Chabad Moshe Link, so he did the job. No, I think he did a good job. He did those periods and the nukudas. But in the original law, it was just one straight text. There were no stops. So on the Shayich Bamuna and the Shai Avodah, Moshe Link was like the main editor. Meaning he did the commas, periods, most of them are Mekoimas. So he really came after the Shai Avodah Zichud, so I got that push to print these. Because I saw most people, when they got the leak, they want to see the original Sefer, and it just wasn't around. Okay. Just one of the I just want to finish is that between the first print and this print, there was a print of someone Avram Moshe Kreuz. So to give him the Yeshkoy for it, he was a Tolzana Chassid, which he was like a real Ovid Hashem that he would have in the cellar 6 hours straight without any interruptions. He was like a next level of Ovid Hashem. And he spent many years of his life to reprint the Shaykh Abun and the Shai Avodah and Avodah Salevi and to make sure there was a big hafetz on it. So his print wasn't like up to date print like today, but it was a print like the basic prints 50 years ago. But really, it's his chus that Morgenstern, he got to it from him. It was really his chus that it was like that, what brought it from that first print to be able to get to here.
Okay, I'm grateful to put out the Sfarim the way they are. It makes it much easier to learn them, etc. And so I recommend anyone else who's interested in this should also pick up these Sfarim. And they can buy them. Some of them I found are out of print. In Eretz Yisrael, I went around the bookshops in Yerushalayim and I couldn't find them. But here in America, Berman and other places have them. You can order them. I don't know if you're going to do another printing.
Yeah, so it's interesting. The Shaykh of Amunah happens to be this Moshe Kreuz. His grandchildren, they're also continuing. So they want to print now Shaykh of Amunah. I'm going to hold on. Really, since mine finished, I would have wanted to reprint it right away. But I wouldn't, since they're supposed to have it sometime soon, so we'll let that print go first.
They're also going to have a new version, or
it'll be something similar to this. It'll be they have a different editor. It might be, I guess it'll be the reader's choice to decide which one did a better job. But it'll be a new print, and so that's supposed to come out really soon. So even though this one's missing, but there'll be that for the. But I hope afterwards, there's many Sfarim today that need even 5 different prints. This will be one of them.
And is there really more of an interest? I saw some of them had sold out. It means they sold a lot of them, right?
Yes. What I found was the Be'ikr, the kilos that we spoke about, that's where the main interest was for these type of Sfarim. But I found also it went all over again. Today I feel that if someone reprints valuable Sfarim, like the Baal Staroshelye, Talmud of Baal gets around, people appreciate.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you very much for spending time with me, and I'm very grateful for it.
Yeah, okay, fine.